on learning styles and multiple intelligences. Now, how do you know that students in your classroom or in your school are learning? Do you think they learn in different ways? Well, let's take, for example, a school made up of animals.
Once upon a time, the animals decided that they must do something heroic to meet the problems of a new world. So they organized a school. They adopted an activity curriculum consisting of running, climbing, swimming, and flying. To make it easier to administer, all animals took all the subjects. The duck was excellent in swimming, better in fact than his instructor, and made excellent grades in flying, but he was very poor in running. Since he was low in running, he had to stay after school and also drop swimming to practice running. This was kept up until his web feet were badly worn, and then he was only average in swimming. But average was acceptable in school, so nobody worried about it except the duck. The rabbit started at the top of his class in running, but had a nervous breakdown because of so much makeup in swimming. The squirrel was excellent in climbing, until he developed frustrations in the flying class, where the teacher made him start from the ground up instead of from the treetop down. He also developed Charlie horses from overexertion, and he got a C in climbing and a D in running. The eagle was a problem child and had to be disciplined severely. In climbing class, he beat all of the others to the top of the tree, but insisted on using his own way of getting there. At the end of the year, an abnormal eel that could swim exceedingly well, and also could run, climb, and fly a little, had the highest average and was valedictorian. The prairie dogs stayed out of school and fought the tax levy because the administration would not add digging and burrowing to the curriculum. They apprenticed their children to the badger, and later joined the groundhogs and gophers to start a successful private school.
Well, just like the animals, do kids learn in different ways, have different skills, different gifts? Well, we've looked at throughout our past 50 years different ways that kids learn and what they're gifted at. Well, traditionally, we've looked at learning styles in the way we sense things, through visual learning, through auditory learning, to touching and movement. These formed early on in educational environments, the traditional way we looked at learning styles. But we're going to look at learning styles in a bunch of different ways. These are by our definition, the cognitive, affective, and psychological traits of learners as they interact with you and in your classroom and schools. Now, learning styles, as we're looking at them, fall between IQ, which differentiates people in terms of mental abilities, and personality tests, which differentiate people according to personality type. So it's kind of a place of its own. We had several books written a couple of decades ago on type A personality, type B personalities, easy way of looking at different personality types and different ways of handling things. But in our way of looking at learning styles, it's a person's style. It's how they reflect on, and it's reflected in their behavior. They process information, and they organize information, they make decisions, forming values in certain preferred ways. And so we're going to look at 4 different learning styles. You have taken various tests like this in your last activity, so we're going to go quickly through the different perspectives, and you can come back. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about each of the points. You can come back or stop the video and look at it more distinctly. But the Myers-Briggs has always been the oldest of the different temperament disorders. It's probably the most valid, most used. In fact, it's been said that the ministers use this the most. They buy this instrument Kersey temperament sorter to help in marriage counseling right before you to get to go through your marriage. But it's basic people patterns, as Kersey calls them, that hold the key to personality types. And each of the letters that your score falls under will represent a certain personality type. For example, the E score is for extroversion. The I on the other end of the spectrum is introversion. He looks at making decisions by sensation or sensing things, or by intuition. T, thinking, feeling. J, judgment, perception. These form a spectrum that have a complexity of traits that indicate your tendency towards making decisions and doing things in your life. For example, the high E's are much more social. They're much more extensive in the way they look at things. They have a lot of relationships. They expend a lot of energies on different types of things. The high I are rather internal. They look within themselves. They have a lot of knowledge over certain things. They have limited relationships, but those relationships are usually very strong. Different ways of interacting with the world. And so we could do the same thing with the S and N scores, the T and F scores, and the J and P. But if you read on in Kersey's book, you'll find that by the using of the highest scores of each of those four divisions, you can find sort of a personality orientation as either a guardian or idealist or rationalist and the like. So interesting temperaments that come out of the Myers-Briggs sort of orientation to looking at personality types. The Gregoric looks at four types, and I like to use these in talking about people. Some are very concrete, sequential, and on the opposite end of the spectrum, very abstract, random, and in between the concrete, random, the abstract, sequential. And if you'd had two people take these tests and you put them on a chart, you might see how they're different, how they're alike. But a good way of looking at the way you operate. And we can go back and look at these slides, but for each of the four dominant areas, like concrete, sequential, what do they do best? What makes sense to them? What works for them? And what questions do these type of kids ask when they're learning? Good way of looking at kids. Also, you'll find in the PowerPoint the types of ways that these kids would work best if you're concrete, sequential, and some of the sentences you would hear these kids asking. I'm sure if you read through there, you'll find, yeah, I've heard this a number of times before. And so you could look at the different four dominant ways of looking at behavior: abstract, random, and abstract, sequential, and then concrete, random. Yeah, I think you'll see different ways that kids process information and how they operate in your classroom. So that's another way of looking at, and probably you took one of those tests, but go back and look at whatever you came up with to see what characteristics really do maybe fit you and see if there's any correlation. True Colors came about by Don Lowry. I had a margarita with him in Tijuana, Mexico after a conference one time, and when he was developing this, and so I like to use his work. It's been to Southeast Kansas once in one of the school districts, but he tests all the kids in the school as well as the teachers, and you find who the orange kids are, the green, gold, and blue, and same thing with the teachers. And each of those teachers and kids have certain learning and teaching styles that represent their color. And again, I'm not going to go into what blue represents, but blue's mainly, usually your nurturing type. They're your elementary teachers. You could read through what their style is when it comes to orientation to the student, how student learning style is interactive, what from the student's perspective, what they would be like if they were blue, and then how a blue student would look at the other teachers. For example, how would a blue teacher see an orange teacher? What would be the strengths and weaknesses of that relationship? The gold are typically your college professors who do a lot of lecture, your high school teachers. They value very practical information, sensible information. There is oriented to the institution, to routines and lectures and textbooks, the traditional way that we typically teach in the secondary school, very culturally oriented. And again, you look at the different ways that they perceive things. The green teacher is oriented towards a little bit of the blue and the gold. They like lecture, but they also like discussion. They like teaching thinking skills. They try to inspire students to think beyond the book and the like. So green is sort of a mixture. A lot of times middle school teachers are a lot like this. And then the orange are, I don't know where I would put these. These are usually some master teachers that once they master this, but they learn by doing. They are usually teach by impulsion. They're like being on a stage, very hands-on type of learning, what's fun and exciting. Typically, they like to be an innovator. They're dynamic, unplanned, somewhat unstructured and disciplined, but the orange usually teach in the here and now, and kids usually in those classrooms are very attentive simply because of the information. So orange teacher, not very organized, but kids are interested in what they teach. And so the True Colors even have as a planning book. How would you teach to those 4 types of kids in your class? So as you develop your lesson plans, how would you orient your teaching towards hitting those 4 learning styles? When you look at brain research too, which is another way of looking at learning styles, we can we can look at how the research has come about through the brain, brain research, with the left brain and right brain, with the left brain person being oriented to being very logical, mathematical, very language oriented. There are science and math teachers, where our right brain people are very intuitive, very creative. They're art and music type of features. And a lot of times in the brain research, you'll find the left hemisphere has certain characteristics. The right hemisphere has other characteristics when it comes to your learning style. But the left and right brain has undergone some controversy on whether or not it is the best way of looking at learning. But see if you're left brain, right brain type of orientation. Zenhausen has some pretty good reliability and validity to it. It is a instrument that we use in education a lot. And analytic basically means left brain, and they have certain characteristics in the way they learn. And the right brain is global. That is, you see the big picture rather than the trees when you read a work. There are different ways that you process information and use it. And when we look at how schools are structured, what are the left or right brain or global and analytic orientations do you think would best fit the American school? Well, traditionally, we have kids sit quietly, they stay in their chairs, they learn alone. A lot of the assessment measurement is by pencil and paper, and most of the learning is passive, by lecture, by discussion. And there's sort of a competition for grades, which one might best fit, the global or the analytic. And most of the time, I think most of you say those left brain analytic people fit better into certain types of schools. But whatever you looked at, we probably could take the orientation that for many kids, or for every kid, learning is a matter of style. And sometimes it's just finding that style unlocking it and getting him to learn through his primary style. And so also the orientation of these schools that concentrate on learning styles is that you don't want to just concentrate on one style, but you want to expand that so you can operate using all styles, so you can learn new ways of learning. Another way of looking at learning styles, we don't call it learning styles, but is through multiple intelligences. And there's, in education, we look at 7 different orientations, sometimes only 6, but we leave out typically 1, the naturalist. But anyway, multiple intelligences takes the orientation that all students are gifted in some way, just like each of the animals you saw in the animal story have their certain ways of doing things and learning things and certain skills or talents. And it asks you to look at what it means to be intelligent in our society in different ways, that we could be intelligent in our society if you looked at a certain way of measuring intelligence. For example, I have no musical skill, so if you look at my music rhythmic intelligence, and I was going to a music conservatory, I would probably be designated as a student that needed special help. So, because I just don't have that gift. But think about that. What abilities do schools value and promote that we measure today a person's intelligence? And they're looking at a paradigm shift that intelligence comes in many different packages. So let's look at the 7 intelligences that Howard Gardner proposed in 1983 in the Frames of Mind. He's a Harvard scholar. He doesn't make many presentations, but his work has been picked up and used by a number of different people now. But he had originally devised 7, and he looked at, traditionally in the paradigm shift, the old traditional way where all kids learn the same way, and changed it to where each kid is unique. That we're not all the same, and we need to value a kid for his uniqueness. We just need to find it. They looked at all kids should learn the same way, a factory model of teaching, but he wanted us to look at how kids learn, how they think, and how they are intelligent, and there are different ways of looking at that. Third, the traditional model looked at testing as the most accurate way of measuring learning, and he proposed that performances are the best way. Performance-based assessments give a more accurate picture of what a kid can do. For example, you teachers, is the best way to find out if you're a great teacher is to give you the PLT test, or through a portfolio of performance-based assessments in your classroom to show what your kids are doing and how they're performing. What's more accurate, would you say? Well, he would propose your performance-based assessments. Also, the traditional model looked at testing as being summative and separate from instruction, but Howard Gardner felt you were always in a process of becoming, so it should almost always be formative and always occurring. And then, which I always hated, the bell-shaped curve. There only could be so many A's and B's and C's, D's and F's, and a good teacher would have a bell-shaped curve. Well, Howard Gardner proposed a J-curve, where it is a teacher's responsibility to develop those intelligences, and a kid's responsibility too, so that all kids are succeeding. Because it is what you're measuring is the objective, and your job is to get most of your kids to achieve that objective, not soar them into a bell curve. So these were a big paradigm shift. And so he looked at the 7 intelligences, and the first one is your verbal linguistic. It deals with thinking in words, and these are people that are intelligent with speech, with writing, with doing things with language. They are usually our lawyers, our politicians, our writers, people that can use words and make them sing. Kids that are verbal linguistic in your class like to do these sorts of assignments. They typically do well in those. The logical mathematical is the second way, and these are people that are math smart. Not so much geometry, but more so a lot of times in algebra, because it's linear thinking. It's looking at how things are connected, what things logically do. They like to manipulate numbers or quantities or operations. And these typically are engineers, are mathematicians. But to think logically is usually logical mathematical orientation. Those types of kids like to do these sorts of things. They like to see charts and graphs and abstract symbols. They love the graphic organizer. They like to find patterns in stuff. So logical mathematical, second way of looking at things. The third is music rhythmic. People that are music smart, capacity to think in music, to think in patterns, to think how you could recognize the patterns in things. They can remember music easily just by listening to it and replicate it. And sometimes they sing in their heads. They can't get it out of their mouths. And these are really gifted types of musicians. And kids that are music rhythmic oriented love to do these sorts of things, to remember things through songs, of using and finding rhythmic patterns in learning aids and the like. So music rhythmic. Fourth one is body kinesthetic. You learn by doing, but your body's smart here. You know how to use your body. You're gifted with a psychomotor recall, where your body can replicate things just by looking at it and keep doing it the same way without much practice. These are athletes. These are performing artists. Our girls in the dance club that can replicate a dance move just by watching it. But they control. Their bodies are well attuned to learning things without much repetition. And these types of kids that learn by doing love to do these things, many of them tactile. And then visual spatial, people that are gifted with seeing space, how things are represented spatially in the world, how things are laid out, like airplane navigators, like chess players, sculptures. They are sometimes are artists. They like our painters. They could be doctors a lot of times. Certain sciences like anatomy have a spatial intelligence to them. So if you're visual spatial, you can easily see a map and know exactly where you are. These are types of kids love to do these types of things that are very visual spatial way of seeing things. Once they see it, they can take a picture of it and know it. And then there's two that are kind of sometimes confusing, the intrapersonal and the interpersonal. While the intra is self-smart. These are people that look inside themselves. They know who they are, what they can do, what they want to do. And so they're very inwardly drawn types of people. They understand themselves, and they are themselves smart with things. And if you're intrapersonal, you like to do these sorts of ways to remember or to learn things, which is a little bit different than all the others. If you're interpersonal, a lot like in the Myers-Briggs, you're more extroverted, where the intra was more introverted in the Myers-Briggs. But here, interpersonal intelligence is being people smart. They have a lot of high EQ. They are many times teachers or salesmen or politicians. They can read people and are good with interpersonal relationships. But the interpersonal skill, and these types of kids are usually you send to the office most of the time because they're always talking, but they love the cooperative learning. They love the things where you get to talk by learning. In fact, they learn by talking it through. And then the naturalists, a lot of times we don't see this in education, but some are gifted just with nature. My son can plant something, make it grow. Some are oriented towards animals that can, like the dog whisperer. They are outdoors people, and they tend to be our botanists, sometimes our chefs, but they like to deal with nature. And those types of kids do well this way, and learning through nature, learning through observations of what goes on in the natural world. And then a lot of times, we very seldom do you see this, but it's the last one, and very seldom do you see it in education. But these are individuals who ponder questions about life and always are questioning things about life, like Aristotle, Confucius. Why are we here on earth? And they're always asked, whatever they're learning, where does it fit into these types of questions? So these are ways that we look at ourselves. And, if you took, hopefully you did the multiple intelligence test, what does your pie look like? Where is the biggest part? What's your primary way of learning? Because you'll find, as all the students in this class took these things, we're going to have different scores, because no one student or one teacher's pie in class is always the same. So when you look at teaching, you might look at some ways of developing multiple intelligence in your lesson plans, and it's real simple to do. You can accommodate almost any lesson plan in these 7 intelligences by having an activity, learning activity that would really fit into one of the 7 types of intelligence for your kids. The kids could even pick what group they want to go to, or you could have a unit where you have to do all 7 of these, so that basically your kids learn in different modes. But multiple intelligences, and in the book that we have in our class, you're going to see some instructional menus that give you all kinds of ideas that we printed in this pass out for each of those 7 intelligences, just ideas that you could use, and techniques and strategies you could use to teach in those strategy and those multiple intelligences. We have them for language arts, for social sciences, for the math, for the science, and using those will just give you a bunch of myriad ideas. And it's exciting to write your own lesson plans and to come up with really inventive types of projects to get kids to move this information from short-term to long-term memory. So hope you believe that all kids are gifted, and some just package it differently. That's Howard Gardner's orientation towards the multiple intelligences. But I think one of the old ancient Chinese proverbs probably best hits it. If you tell me, I tend to forget it pretty quickly. If you show me, I remember. And then if you involve me in what I'm learning, I understand. Just like teaching. You can read the book. It's not going to make you a great teacher, because you usually forget most of what. If you watch videos, you might remember some of it, but really you learn to teach by doing, and so do kids. Hope you enjoy it.